So if you grew up in church, you may already know this, but kind of at the heart of the Christian faith is a very simple invitation. And the very simple invitation is this: to believe in Jesus. To believe in who he is. As Christians, we believe that he is the Son of God or the Savior of the world. To believe in what he has done. If you're a Christian, you believe that he has forgiven your sins. Guilt and shame no longer need to weigh you down. He has given you life, not just this life, but life after this life, eternal life. He's also given you victory over things like the devil. The devil can no longer destroy you, and he's given you victory over sin. Sin can no longer define you. At the heart of the Christian faith is this simple invitation to believe in Jesus for who he is and for what he's done. But just because that is at the heart of the Christian faith, here's what else we need to understand. That does not mean that that is the only parts of the Christian faith, because Christianity is full of many wonderful and marvelous parts. And a very important part of the Christian faith is this: if at the heart of the Christian faith is who we trust in, a very important part of the Christian faith is what we entrust. Because one of the invitations that we also receive, if you follow Jesus, is to entrust everything that you have and everything that you are to Jesus. Give it all over to him. Hand it all over to him. Hand over your hopes and your dreams, your aspirations, your joys. Hand over the tough stuff of life, your sorrows, your sins, your fears, your regrets. Hand over the stuff that you have. From the home that you live in to the car that you drive. Hand over even the people in your lives. Your family, your spouse, your kids, your grandkids. Hand over your financial resources. We entrust all that we have and all that we are to Jesus. At the heart of the Christian faith is who we trust in. But a really important part of the Christian faith is an invitation to entrust. And that's why this week in Design, we're kicking off this brand new series. For 3 weeks, it is called Entrusted, and it is all about this very important part of the Christian faith, that we are called to give over everything that we have and everything that we are to Jesus. Now, specifically in this series, we're going to be talking about entrusting our money or entrusting our financial resources to Jesus. Now, let me say this right up front. I know that it is treacherous territory to talk about money in church. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I know it's treacherous territory. In fact, maybe you're here this morning, and this was the weekend that you decided that you were going to invite a friend to church, and now you are like just riddled with regrets, because you're thinking, I cannot believe that I invited my friend on the week that the pastor is going to talk about money. Or maybe you're that friend who has just been invited, and you're thinking to yourself, I cannot believe that I accepted that invitation. Because you know what the stereotype about churches is, right? All they want is your what? Your money. It's kind of the stereotype. And so all they talk about is how to give your money. Now, if that's kind of the tape that you're playing in your head right now, can I just say a couple of things? First, I want you to know this. At Zion, we do talk about money, but we do not talk about money all the time. Nor do I think we should talk about money all the time. But there are a couple of really important reasons why I think it's worth it to talk about money every once in a while, part of the time. Here are the two reasons. Number one, the Bible talks quite a bit, actually, about money. If you read through the 4 biographies of Jesus, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll find these series of stories that Jesus tells. They're called parables. And Jesus tells 38 of them. Well, 11 out of the 38 parables have something to do with money. Or if you read through the New Testament, you will find that 1 out of 10 verses in the New Testament have something to do with money. Or if you kind of expand that out to the whole Bible, you will find that there are over 2,000 verses in the Bible that have something to do with money. Here's the thing. We're a church. We talk about the Bible, and because the Bible talks about money every once in a while, you know what we talk about too? We talk about money too. But that's not the only reason we talk about money every once in a while. Here's the other reason we talk about money. The reason we talk about money is because we talk about money. Not just here, but out there. Be honest, over the past month, how many of you have had some sort of discussion somewhere, someplace, sometime, having something to do with money? We do this all the time, especially when we're at work. We're always talking about, profit and loss sheets, trying to make sure everything balances out. Or maybe you talk to your spouse about the household budget. Or maybe if you got kids, what are you trying to do? You're trying to teach them the value of a dollar. So you say stuff to them like, money doesn't grow on trees. We talk about money all the time. In fact, some of us worry about money all the time. Because maybe your budget is a little stretched thin. And you don't know what you're going to do. So it's only appropriate to talk about in church what we worry about in real life, because in church we actually get the benefit of hearing Jesus' wisdom applied to our worries. And so that's why for the next few weeks we're going to be talking about entrusting our financial resources, entrusting our money to Jesus. Now, as we kick off this series, we're going to be walking through and working through one of those parables, one of those stories that Jesus tells about money. And just to kind of give you a little bit of context and a little bit of background, a parable is a story that Jesus tells, but it's a story with a purpose. And usually most parables have a couple of different purposes. Purpose number one is this: to show us something about God, to teach us about how God works and about who God is. But here's the second purpose of a parable: to show us something about ourselves. Parables are really good at digging into human psychology. And we're going to see in this parable that we look at today that Jesus does both of these things really well. He tells us something about God, and he shows us something about ourselves. And so here's the parable we're going to walk through and work through today from Matthew 25, beginning at verse 14. Here's Jesus' story. The kingdom of heaven is going to be like a man who's going on a journey, and he called his servants in, and look at this. Here's the title for our sermon series. He entrusted his wealth to them. Jesus says, once upon a time, there was this man, and this man was going on a journey. Now, Jesus doesn't tell us where this man was going. I happen to think this man was going on a cruise. Here's why. I actually have a bit of reasoning behind this. Anybody in here ever been on a cruise? Anybody in here ever noticed the Wi-Fi on cruises are really spotty? It's really spotty. It's in, it's out, it works sometimes, it doesn't. Well, how in the world are you supposed to manage all your brokerage accounts if you don't have good Wi-Fi? So this guy, he goes on a journey. He cannot get to any of his accounts. He cannot do online banking. He cannot trade stocks. He cannot do any of that because of the bad Wi-Fi on the cruise ship. So he calls in his servants and he says to them, listen, I'm going away, and so I'm going to entrust my money to you, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to manage it well and make sure that it's okay. The story continues, verse 15. To one servant, he gives 5 bags of gold. To another, he gives 2 bags of gold. And to another, he gives 1 bag of gold. Now, if you grew up in church, you may have heard this story before, told as the parable or the story of the talents. Let me give you a little bit of technical work here. The New Testament, originally written in Greek, and the Greek word behind this phrase, bag of gold, is the word talanta. We get an English word from this, which is the word talents. Now, a talent in the ancient world, this was not something that you would do on America's Got Talent. This was actually a unit or a measurement of money, and specifically, it was a weight of gold. Kind of like today, you have gold that is measured in ounces or grams. Well, back then, gold was sometimes measured in talents. And here's what you need to know. One talent equals 75 pounds of gold. That'll buy you a thing or two, don't you think? In fact, let's just do a little bit of math here. The going rate for gold per ounce these days is about $2,000 per ounce. Now you take that and you turn it into 1 pound, and you find that 1 pound of gold is worth $29,160. But that's just 1 pound of gold. You got to multiply that times 75 to get you 1 talent of gold. So by the time you're through, you wind up with 1 talent, just 1 talent of gold, being worth $2,187,000 using today's currency. It turns out that this master with these servants is loaded. He has a lot of money. But it's here at this point in the parable that I think we can begin to learn something very interesting about human psychology. And let me get at it this way. Be honest. I know you're in church, but don't be pious. Be honest. If you could choose to be any one of these servants, which one would you choose to be? Let's do some math. So, the guy who gets 1 bag of gold, 1 talent, he gets about $2.2 million. The guy who gets 2 bags of gold, he doubles the money, gets about $4.4 million. The guy who gets 5 bags of gold, 5 talents worth of gold, that's almost $11 million. All right. If you could just choose, which guy would you choose to be? The 1 bag guy, the 2 bag guy, or the 5 bag guy? Which one will we all choose? Let's just be honest. We'd all choose the 5 bags. Of course we would. This is why nobody plays the Powerball until it's worth over $1 billion, because there's just something inside of us that wants as much as we can get. It's the way human psychology works. And this isn't just true of money. This is true in all areas and aspects of life. Let's say that you like to be an academic. You don't just want to be smart, you want to be the smartest. Salutatorian's fine, but you really want to be the valedictorian. Or let's say that you're an athlete and you run a race. You don't just want to be fast, you want to be the fastest. You want to come in first, because you know what second place is? First loser. That's all it is. There's something inside of us that wants to be the biggest, the best, the fastest, the smartest, and have the most. It's something in human psychology. One of the things that this parable is going to lead us to wrestle with is this: what if that isn't always good for us? The story continues. Matthew 25, verse 16, the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once, and he put his money to work, and he gained 5 bags of gold more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold, he also put his money to work, and he gained 2 bags of gold more. It turns out that these first 2 servants, they're on it. They go through Dave Ramsey 8 times, and they get a job at Merrill Lynch, and they turn investing into a full-time strategy. And they make sure that they can double their master's money, because they're really excited about what he has entrusted to them. But now we get to the 3rd servant, the servant who had received 1 bag of gold. Verse 18, the man who had received 1 bag of gold went off. He dug a hole in the ground. And look at what he does with his master's money. He hides his master's money. A little bit more technical work here for you. The Greek word behind this word, hid, is the word crypto. We get an English word from this, a crypt. You know what a crypt is? It's where you put dead bodies. This servant is treating his master's money like it's something that's dead and needs to be buried. Well, verse 19 of Matthew 25, after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and he settled accounts with them. Now, I want to pause right here, and I just want to make sure that we're all kind of tracking with the story. Remember what a parable is. It's a story that teaches us or shows us something about God, and it's a story that teaches us or shows us something about ourselves. And so we should be able to find God in the story and also ourselves in the story. And so where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves in the servants. Where do we find God in the story? Who's God in the story? He is the what? The master. And so Jesus kind of turns this corner in the story in verse 19, and he says, after a long time, the master is going to return. And here's what Jesus is saying. After a lifetime, after your lifetime, your master is going to return. God is going to return. And he's going to have a score to settle with you. He's going to have an account to reconcile with you. All of the stuff that he has given to you, from your home to your family, to your financial resources, to your wealth, to your life. He's going to ask you this question: what did you do with what I entrusted to you? That's what the master does with these servants. And in Matthew 25, verse 20, the man who had received 5 bags of gold, he brought the other 5. And he said, Master, you entrusted me. There's the title of our series again. You entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful," and then I love this next phrase, "with a few things. I'm going to put you in charge of many things." Let me ask you this question. This guy who received 5 bags of gold received almost $11 million. Anybody think $11 million is a few things? Like no big deal? You know, one of the things that I think we can also learn from this parable about God is this. Sometimes the things that we think are big deals in God's sight are just small fries. The things that we think are super valuable, like almost $11 million, God looks at that and he goes, The things that keep us up at night, that make us worry, God doesn't seem to worry about it at all. So, if that's the way that God sees it, how do you think we should see it? Now the story continues, verse 22 of Matthew 25. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. "Master," he said, and here's our word again, "you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. And his master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And then same line. "You've been faithful with a few things." I don't know if $4.4 million is a few things, but okay, that's what the master thinks. "I'll put you in charge of many things." But now in verse 24, the story all of a sudden takes a very dark turn. Because now the man who had received 1 bag of gold, he came to the master and he said, "Master, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out, and I I buried your $2.2 million worth of gold in the ground." You don't have to be a financial expert here. Anybody in here think burying $2.2 million in your backyard is a good investment strategy? Anybody? Just the security issues with that alone are astronomical. But not only that, let's be honest about something. This is just flat out lazy. It's just lazy. To make money off his master's money, this servant wouldn't have had to do much. He just would have had to go to the Wells Fargo, put it in a savings account, and get a little bit of interest. But he doesn't even do that. This guy is lazy, he is reckless, he is irresponsible, but here's the fascinating thing about this servant. Do you know who he blames for being lazy and reckless and irresponsible? He blames his master. Look at what he says to his master again. Verse 24, "Master, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and that's why I went out, and that's why I hid your gold in the ground." In other words, this is your fault, master. You're hard driving. You're fast paced. You're overwhelming. And quite frankly, you're scary, and I was afraid of you. I was paralyzed with fear, and that's why I didn't do what you asked me to do. If you were just nicer, I would have done better. This is your fault, master. And then, what I think is the second saddest line in this parable. The servant finally says to his master in verse 25, "See, here's what belongs to you." He exhumes the gold from the ground, throws it back to his master. Here's why I think that line is so sad. The first 2 servants, when the master comes back, they respond to the master with joy. In verse 20, the 5-bag guy says, "Master, I'm overwhelmed. How can it be that you've entrusted to me 5 bags of gold? This is so wonderful." The 2-bag guy does the same thing. A couple of verses later, verse 22, he says, "Master, how can it be that you've entrusted to me 2 bags of gold? This is wonderful." But the guy who received 1 bag, he didn't do that. He didn't say, "Master, how can it be that you've entrusted to me this incredible bag of gold?" He basically says to his master, this whole thing has been a pain for me, and you're scary. I never wanted this. I never needed this. I don't even like this. Here, just take it back. Here's what belongs to you, not here's what you have entrusted to me. He seems to be angry. Now, you got to ask this question, why? If somebody said to you, here's $2.2 million, would you like it? Would you be angry about that? So why is this guy so angry about that? This guy seems to have a bit of a problem, and here's the problem. He's so busy looking at what the master has given to the other two servants that he forgets to be grateful for what the master has actually given to him. And here's where I think each and every one of us need to do a bit of a gut check, because, come on, be honest. You, me, we do the same thing too. This parable is a reminder that God has given us. God the Master has given us everything that we have, but how often do we look at what God has given other people and what they have, and we go, I'd kind of like that. I mean, yeah, God's given us our house, but boy, I sure do wish he would have given me that nicer house that my neighbor lives in. Yeah, God's given me my truck, but I sure do wish he would have given me that Super Duty truck that my friend drives. Yeah, I get to go out to the lake. I live real close, but I sure do wish that God would have given me my friend's boat, because then I could go out there and go fishing whenever I wanted to. Yeah, God's given me my money, but I sure do wish he would have just given me a little bit more. Do you know what happens when we look at what God has given other people? Rather than focusing on what God has given us, we take blessings that the Master wants to give us and we turn them into burdens. And all those burdens do is bury us. They bury us in resentment. They bury us in comparison. They bury us in frustration. They bury us in lack. Heck, they can bury us in debt if we try to go and get what our friends have, even though we can't afford what they have. And eventually, they just leave us feeling empty. And so one of the big challenges of this parable is this. The Master says, do not bury what he wants to give to you and to me. Instead, be grateful for it. Be thankful for it. In a couple of weeks here at Zion, we're going to celebrate something that I kind of hope becomes an annual tradition here at Zion. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be celebrating something called Commitment Sunday, and you should get a letter. If you call Zion your church home, if you're a member here, you should get a letter from me and Pastor Kevin explaining more about Commitment Sunday. Here's kind of the heart of Commitment Sunday. We're going to ask you, if you call Zion your church home, to pledge as to how you can commit to supporting this ministry over the coming fiscal year, so 2023, 2024. And here's the reason that we're asking you to make a commitment, to make a pledge. It's because when we give to Zion, I firmly believe this, we give to something that grows. Because that's what we're committed to here at Zion. We are committed to growing. In all sorts of different ways. We're committed to growing in our faith. That's why we have a connection hour with Bible studies, so that we can be in the Word, learn the Word, study the Word, and grow in our knowledge of the Word. We're committed to growing. We are committed to growing in our relationship with the community. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we did an Easter egg hunt here in a kids service on Easter Saturday, and we got kids from Zion, but also kids from outside of Zion who come to this because we want our relationship with not only people who are already here, but people who are not yet here to grow. We're committed to growing faith in the next generation. That's why we got our VBS coming up this summer. That's why we have a school that's as old as the church itself. Because we want to pass the faith down from generation to generation to generation to generation. And that's why I believe that when we give to a place like Zion, when we give to a church, it's not just that we're giving, it's that we're investing. Because for 2,000 years now, the church has been growing. Now, if you're a guest here this morning, you need to know I'm not asking you to make a pledge. But I would like to invite you to come back on May 7th. It's going to be Commitment Sunday, and here's the way it's going to work. You'll read more about this in the letter when you receive it. We're going to have a couple of pledge baskets up here up front, and you're going to receive a pledge card along with a letter. Just prayerfully consider how you can support the ministry, and then on that Sunday, we're going to come forward. We're actually going to put our pledge cards in these pledge baskets, and it's meant to be a visible sign of our commitment to a couple of things. Number one, to God. This is God's church. But number two, to each other. We're all in this together. And if you're a guest, here's the reason I want you to come on that Sunday. You don't have to make a pledge. You don't have to put a dime in an offering basket. Just watch and then ask this. Is that the kind of community I want to be a part of? It's committed to God and loves each other. It'll be there for each other. Now, one more thing before we wrap up. I mentioned the second saddest verse in this parable is when the servant takes the money the master has given to him and throws it back at him and says, "Here, take what belongs to you." You know what I think the saddest verse in this parable is? It's actually the very last verse of this parable. It's what the master says to the servant in Matthew 25, verse 30, when he says, "Throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now you read that and you go, whoa. In fact, what makes it even harder is that's the last line of the parable. Jesus done. He's done. And you go, I was kind of hoping for, and they lived happily ever after. That's not the way this parable ends. Now, on the one hand, this is actually meant to be a warning. Because after a lifetime, the master is going to return. And for those who have rejected the master, said, "Master, I don't want what you have to give," the master will say, "Okay," and they're going to be separated from him. That's a stark and stern warning. But here's what I want to focus on in this moment. Maybe for you it doesn't so much feel like a warning. Maybe for you it feels more like a reality. Maybe for you one of the reasons you always hate it when the pastor talks about money in church is not because you don't want to give. You do. You do. But you don't have anything to give. Maybe it's because of no fault of your own, you've just had some real tough financial hits. Maybe it was that big medical bill that kind of wiped you out. Or maybe you did something a long time ago that's affected you all these years later. Maybe you took out a few too many college loans in college, and now you want to pay for your kids' college, but you feel like you can't because you're still paying for your college. Or maybe in your younger years, you just made a few foolish financial decisions and bought a few too many of those toys that you couldn't afford, and now you got all this debt with a 28% interest rate that you can't pay. And you know exactly what it feels like to feel like you're left on the outside looking in. Everybody else, it seems like they got their financial act together, but you don't. You're falling apart. And it kind of buries you. Stresses you out in your marriage. Your kids kind of resent you because they can't get, what all those other families can give their kids. And if you're honest, just like this servant, sometimes you even weep. You gnash your teeth. If this is you, I want to say something to you. If financially you walked in here feeling buried and now the pastor's talking about giving money, here's what I want you to know. It turns out that God is quite adept at taking things that everybody assumes are dead and buried and bringing them back. In fact, one of the most fascinating features of the story is actually where it's situated in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew 25. We actually know what day of the week Jesus told this story on. He told it on a Tuesday. On a Tuesday. He told it on the Tuesday before the Thursday that he was arrested by some of his enemies. He told it on the Tuesday before the Thursday that he was drugged to a trial where he was brought up on all sorts of false charges. He told it on the Tuesday before the Thursday that he was drugged from trial to trial. And then he told it on the Tuesday before the Friday that at the final trial, he got convicted. And then he told it on the Tuesday before the Friday when he was sentenced to death on a cross. He told it on the Tuesday before the Friday that when he was nailed to a cross and after he died, he was laid in a crypto, in a tomb. And it was at that moment, at that point, that everybody thought that Jesus was buried and dead and done. But God has a funny way, my friends, of taking things that everybody else thinks are dead and buried and bringing them back. And so if you're sitting here and you're going, there's just no way. There's just no way. I don't even want to hear about money. Here's something I just want you to pray about and think about. If God can do that with a person, maybe, just maybe, can he do it with a pocketbook? The heart of the Christian faith is who you trust in. You trust in Jesus. A very important part of the Christian faith is what you entrust. And that's just not about giving money. That's about entrusting everything. Even the things that stress you out and wear you down and make you feel like your soul is thin. Even the things in your life that make you feel buried, entrust them all to Him. Because He can make them and you live again.